Thank you for being here when I needed you. Just a couple quick announcements this afternoon. Last I saw of the Scholar Open Mic sign-up sheet, there was one name. So scholars, please sign up at dinner. If you don't join your lone friend, we might just push it back to tomorrow night, but we'll check after dinner. There will be a van run to Monteagle tomorrow immediately following lunch, so if you've discovered, I hope you haven't gone this long without a toothbrush, but if you've forgotten anything like that, we'll take you to the dollar store and the pig and places you need to go. It will leave at 1 o'clock from the front of the Sewanee Inn. We'll do the same thing the next day, so if you have a workshop tomorrow, you have to wait till the next day or ask one of your buddies not in your workshop to pick stuff up for you in Monteagle. And one last request, please, when you leave this room after readings and lectures, if you'll take your garbage, we would appreciate it because we're the ones picking it up otherwise. Okay, thank you. And now for Charles Martin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to read for the Sewanee community, and I want to thank Wyatt for inviting me down again to do it yet once more, and to thank the wonderful staff for making this thing so marvelous. And I also want to thank Wyatt for making me miss July. Let's see. I think this is probably the first time I've ever planned a poetry reading around a T-shirt. I'll have more to say about that later. But I'm going to start off. I don't remember what year it was that I came here, and I heard Romulus Linney perform one of his one-act plays. When the time came for his reading, he got up and began reading the play and doing all of the parts of it. And I was astounded by it, partly because he was just so wonderful as a performer. And the other thing was that although I had gone to poetry readings and fiction readings since college, it had never occurred to me that you could actually do that with a play, that you could get up and perform it. I still don't have a play to perform, but I've been working on a translation of Euripides' Medea, and I'm going to do just a scene from the Medea. It's called the Messenger's Speech Scene. Let me give you some background. Medea was married to the hero Jason. They had 2 children, according to some sources. They came to the city of Corinth, and Jason dumped his wife and kids and connected with the princess daughter of King Creon of Corinth, abandoning Medea and the children. This did not sit well with Medea, and she decided to get vengeance on her ex. And by the end of the play, I'm sure you realize that her own children will have been murdered too by Medea. But first, what she has done has been to arrange that Jason and the children will take gifts to the princess bride, wardrobe gifts, which have been subtly poisoned. So the princess bride is a goner. And in this scene, Medea is waiting. Medea is waiting to hear the results of what happened with the poison. I think that's basically all you need to know. There are two voices. There's Medea, who has a short voice, short piece, and then the messenger's monologue. Medea is anticipating triumph. She's anxiously awaiting news of the reception when she sees a messenger approaching. Medea, my friends, I have been waiting in suspense for a long time to see what would ensue. Now one of Jason's men comes into view, gasping for breath, no doubt to announce some gratifying new catastrophe. Messenger enters from stage right, gasping. Your lawless acts resulted in disaster, Medea. Go now. You've no choice but to flee by ship or chariot, whichever's faster. Medea calmly. Why must I hasten? What is happening? Messenger. You've poisoned both the princess and King Creon. Medea. You'll be my cherished friend from this day on, so splendid a report it is you bring. Messenger. You can't be all there, lady. Are you mad? You've just destroyed the royal family and you joke about it? Aren't you afraid? Medea. Words. Oh, if I wished I could reply. But slow down, friend. I mean to savor this. Now tell me, since you saw it, how did they die? In agony? Then I'll have twice the bliss. Messenger. When your two boys and husband had appeared at the bride's house and entered, those of us who had suffered from your griefs were greatly cheered. From ear to ear, the welcome news that you had settled amicably with your spouse went buzzing through the servants of the house. One kissed the children's hands in his elation, another their golden curls. I shared in their joys and followed the swelling throng in celebration into the women's quarters with your boys. The mistress we now honor in your place wasn't aware your sons were there at first. Her gaze was fixed on her new husband's face, and the boy's approach took her by surprise. Soon as she noticed them, she veiled her eyes and turned away her pale cheek in disgust. Your husband, though, attempted to assuage her anger, telling her, you mustn't be an enemy of those who are dear to me. Turn back to us again without your rage. Let those I call my friends be yours as well. They bring you gifts which I would have you take. Then plead with Creon so he won't expel the children from this land for your husband's sake. As soon as she had seen the elegant finery they offered, all resistance collapsed, and she gave Jason her consent. He and the boys had traveled no great distance from the bride's house when she put on the gown and on her golden curls set the gold crown, as pleased as any girl by a new bonnet. She held a mirror up before her hair, smiled at the lifeless image glimpsed within it, then lifted herself lightly from her chair and elegantly danced about her suite, wrapped in her gifts, admiring them and how they suited her, her pale white feet capering as she checked her swirling hem. Then came a truly horrifying sight. Her color changed. She staggered left and right, stumbling until she found her seat once more, managing barely to avoid the floor. One of her slaves, perhaps in the belief that she had either been possessed by Pan or by another god, raised a festive cry, until she saw the white foam on her lips and the tormented madness in her eye, her bloodless skin. The hymn that she began trailed off and turned into a wail of grief. At once a servant ran to find her father back in his chambers, as yet unaware of what had been happening. Another went searching for the husband, now outside, to tell him what had happened to his bride. Others were running madly everywhere. In the time in which a rapid sprinter runs the second leg of a 200-yard dash, the princess became conscious once again. Her eyes sprang open and she groaned in pain, for grief assailed her from two sources now, as suddenly a dreadful stream of flame erupted from the garland on her brow, while the woven robe, the gift of your two sons, was eating through the wretched woman's flesh. Then leaping from her chair, she fled on fire, tossing her hair now one way, now another, trying to shake the garland from her head. But the golden band shook her off instead, and her exertions made the flames leap higher. Disaster claimed her. She crumpled to the floor, unrecognizable but to her father. Her eyes no longer lovely as before, that face of hers no longer beautiful. Fiery blood dripped from her ruined crown, and from her white bones the scorched flesh fell like resin from a pine torch dripping down, all burned off by the poisons you'd employed. No one could bear to see the girl destroyed, yet none was brave enough to intervene, so well had we all learned from what we'd seen. But when her father, who had not yet heard of the calamity that had occurred, came in and stumbled on her without warning, he clasped her body in a last embrace, and as he kissed her desolated face, cried out in his mad grief these words of mourning. "Oh, my unlucky darling, my poor dear, which of the gods has treated you this way, has shamed you like this on your wedding day? I am bereft, a walking sepulchre. Oh, daughter, daughter, let me die with you." But when his lamentation had at last ended and the king attempted to lift his aged body to his feet once more, he found himself stuck to the gown, held fast by the subtle stuff that drew him toward the floor, clinging to him as ivy clings to bay. He struggled, but he couldn't get away. She held him and prevented him from rising, and if he struggled with her, it would cleanse the ancient flesh from his unyielding bones. That was enough. Enough to say that he died overwhelmed by his catastrophe. Who would not weep? They lie there side by side in death, an aged father, a young bride. I will say nothing of your likely fate, but soon enough you'll get your recompense. I've often thought that life is just a show of shadows, and I wouldn't hesitate to say that those most sure of what they know, whose polished speeches reek of confidence, are the more fools to think themselves clever. No mortal may attain to a blessed state. If wealth pours in, you're truly fortunate, you're lucky in your life, but blessed, never. Exit messenger. It's kind of interesting. The business where they measure time by a 200-yard dash, how long it takes to do part of a 200-yard dash. If you don't have a watch to look at, how are you going to measure time except by some kind of common physical activity? The poem that that the T-shirt has put on its back is a poem called "A Happy Ending for the Lost Children," which I suppose might suggest that I am not the Medea type. I'm not into tragedy. I'm into lucky getaways and happy escapes and all. I'll read a few poems that were written around the happy ending for the lost children, and they deal with getting away or not getting away, slipping out or not being able to. The first is called "After the Rape of the Sabine Women," and if you remember your Latin class, the Sabine women were kidnapped by the Romans to become their brides in the mythological time of Rome. So this is after the rape of the Sabine women. They never speak of what happened during their capture. The house-to-house searches, the violent seizures, the brisk allotment of women to sausage-faced soldiers ripping off bronze-plated armor in innocent rapture. But of some last choice made earlier that morning, the lover or book chosen for wit, for beauty, or for idleness, torn out of hand without warning and flung away broken. Now in the streets of the city, they move with an air of abstraction, pushing their infants before them like so many dowsers searching for water. Breasts drip with milk, knuckles whiten on a stroller's chromium bar. A single moment's confusion leaves one a hostage forever, inscribing invisible, momentary lines in the language of desire. This is called domestic interior. When I try to imagine the Garden of Eden, I see an upended cave like the one which my son has created out of the now lidless cardboard carton in which a neighbor's Frigidaire arrived, and a woolen blanket liberated from an upstairs closet. Done with the chore of rearranging mental furniture, he clambers into place and hunkers down with the odors, those imaginary friends from an unimaginable past. Warmed by his warmth, they come forth, voices drawn out of the blanket's faded memory, out of the threadbare fabric of that nest. Sometimes the escape is into yourself. This is called Speech Against Stone. I watch the man in the schoolyard as he brushes a flat coat of institutional beige over a wall brilliant with childish graffiti, turning a fresh page, a surface the kids will respray as soon as his back is turned. I suppose I should be thinking, as any upstanding tax-paying citizen would, of the money and man-hours spent covering up these phosphorescent hues and adolescent cries of discontent. But as he continues, I find myself divided. The huge roller goes sweeping on over the stone, and I see in what he is doing a labor not unlike my own when I erase letter by letter the words I've just written in the hope that all my scratching out may summon something better. And besides, the wall surely approves of this work, for who can believe that it would choose to say, fuck the world, or Fat Anthony's a jerk, or DMF Jose? No. Left to its own devices, the wall would stand forever an unlettered book, prepared to meet eternity's inspection with its own blank look. But that, of course, is what summons the hidden children out of their hiding places. That inviting blankness as the janitor finally covers up the last traces, gathers together his painting gear, and goes clattering off. No sooner gone than they return to renew the ancient complaint of speech against stone, spelling out, misspelling often, the legends of the heart's lust for joy and violence in waves that break upon but will not soften the cliffs of obdurate silence. And this is a happy ending for the lost children. And it's basically that wonderful feminist tract, the Hansel and Gretel story, in which it's actually the girl who saves her brother from certain death at the hands of the witch. So it's a kind of retelling of that. A happy ending for the lost children. One of their picture books would no doubt show the two lost children wandering in a maze of anthropomorphic tree limbs. The familiar crow swoops down upon the trail they leave of corn, tolerant of the error of their ways. Hand in hand, they stumble into the story, bright-eyed with beginnings of fever, scared half to death, yet never for a moment doubting the outcome that had been prepared long in advance. Girl saves brother from oven, appalling witch dies in appropriate torment. Her hoarded treasure buys them their parents' love. As happy an ending as any fable can provide, squawks the crow, who had expected more delicate morsels from the witch's table. It's an old story. In the modern version, the random children fall to random terror. You see it nightly on the television. Cameras focus on the lop-eared bear beside the plastic ukulele, shattered in a fit of rage. The lost children are found in the first place we now think to look, under the fallen leaves, under the scattered pages of a lost children's picture book. But if we leave terror waiting in the rain for the wrong bus, or if we have terror find at the very last moment the right train only to get off at the wrong station, if we for once imagine a happy ending, which is as always a continuation, it's because the happy ending's a necessity. It isn't just a sentimental ploy. Without the happy ending, there would be no one to tell the story to but the witch, and the story is clearly meant for the girl and boy just now about to step into her kitchen. In thinking about that, it occurred to me that a lot of my poems are about escapes, and one kind of lucky escape or another, or maybe not a lucky escape, depending. This is a poem called Souvenir. The souvenir in question is a corn husk cricket, a little cricket made out of corn husk, wrapped in a plastic bag and sold on the streets of Rome a few years ago. Souvenir. Somehow it had escaped by the time that we had flown back to New York City and on to our new home. That slender insect shaped from a green husk of corn, twisted until crickety on a cobbled street in Rome. A Chinese immigrant, perched by a cardboard box, fashioned these vegetal crickets and grasshoppers. His wiry fingers bent and tied the sheaths to flex in forms that would appeal to bargain-hunting shoppers. Bagged up in plastic, tied with little wire collars, like goldfish in their bowls waiting for adoption, each silent cricket vied for euros or for dollars and waited to be sold. It had no other option. If it had been poverty, the dull, incessant grind of want which went unheeded, that snatched up and replanted him here in Italy, what put it in his mind to sell what no one needed and almost no one wanted? Was it just ignorance of the foreign market? That and the optimist's more than half-filled glass. What every Roman wants is a good corn husk cricket. With a few deft ties and twists, my dream will come to pass. No, that isn't funny. He sleeps on a low cot in a single crowded room on the shift assigned him. He owes his landlord money. He fears he's been forgotten by his family back home. Will good luck ever find him? Perhaps. Que sera, sera. But now, among the fakes, the faux Gucci scarves and shoes, the AA batteries and plastic ephemera, he stands by his box and makes a life he did not choose from what would otherwise be overlooked as waste, as he himself might be in this world's new order. But how shall the genuine not be wholly effaced from life and memory and taught to slip the border? How, if not by design? This next poem is a poem about a painting. It's a painting of Vermeer's at the Frick, and it's the one that is called Mistress and Maid. And it's a painting in which a fairly wealthy mistress is busy writing at her desk when the maid comes in with a letter for her and startles her, and you're meant to read into the painting what occurs. It is one of my favorite New York paintings, and it seems to say an awful lot about life in New York. So at the end, I take the liberty of slicing the mistress out of the painting and sending her off on her way in a taxi cab. Light flickers gaily over those surfaces that in this painting represent what, if not beauty and pleasure, health and value? Framed by the background, the homely servant, whose downcast glance suggests her uneasiness, presents a note appearing to startle her seated mistress, who must have found it either unwelcome or unexpected, if not unwelcome. We cannot ever know if what she had begun writing one lover was interfered with by another's well-timed or untimely importuning. Soon, other readings, each just as possible, will come to press their claims on the spectator. But we can say no more for certain than that there has been an interruption. Unconscious act and conscious reflection were caught as she touched her chin with the fingertips of her left hand, while from her right she let the pen drop to the covered table. So, if I claim Vermeer must have wanted this uneasy painting read as a secular annunciation, where the one picked happens to be neither maid nor maiden, I mean it just as a thought experiment. There's not the slightest hint of submissiveness in her demeanor, and the drama played out about her is her own doing. Nor do I find it even implausible to see the maid as angelic messenger. In Annunciation, brightness flows into darkness and so transforms it, while here a girl, constrained by her poverty, briefly enters a plane of great privilege. Whatever right she has to be here is one that she has been granted merely. But this is not about the inequality inherent in a common relationship, nor will some god reduce the mistress to the sealed chamber of his abidance. This is about the free play of consciousness in steady light that limns and illuminates those whom it falls upon, the favored few constrained only by what they've chosen. She'll leave this morning or this evening. She'll change out of that sable-lined satin robe, put on something a bit more modish and less conspicuous, flag a taxi, and after zipping down on Fifth Avenue, she'll meet a friend for drinks at the Century Club and then leave to catch a red-eye flight to the Netherlands on KLM. That poem was written in something called the Alcaic meter, which was sort of a classical meter that English poets and American poets have adopted for use in our time. I have read at venues where if I said something like that, I would have been dragged away from the podium, taken out, and horsewhipped for mentioning meter, and it would have been a few extra strokes if it had been a classical meter. But here at Sewanee, I feel very, very safe in that regard. Alicia Stallings and I were sitting in the inn in the back part of behind the center lobby, planning our class the other morning, and there was a group going off on a campus tour, and suddenly the group fell silent, and I heard a voice say, "My name is Virgil. I will be your guide." And I thought, well, if they can do the Inferno at 9 o'clock in the morning, I don't have anything to worry about. So I'll read another alcaic poem. This is called "For the End of the Age of Irony." It has a reference in it to a translation by Donald Justice of a poem by Baudelaire, which I think Justice calls "The Clumsy Servant." It's one of my favorite translations of his. But as I was reading Philip Hoy's interview with Justice a couple of weeks ago, and I came across a quotation that is going to be from now on the epigraph to "For the End of the Age of Irony." He says, "I felt touched by an emotion I must have been inventing." Why, if it's gone now, is there this leftover ambience seeping into and straining the fabric of our conversation, like red wine spilled on the bone-white sofa? Though its infrequent sightings are treated as cases of mere mistaken identity, and though its age may now be ended, it seems that irony is not quite done for. One old employer pays it occasional visits on Sunday, riding a trolley car out to the suburbs where it lingers, though much diminished, as he informs us. Odd to contrast its formerly vigorous habits of growth, its flourishing presence in those lives to which it once seemed central, with its now marginal situation. Off in the corner, fusty leaves withering. If only we'd remembered to water it every so often. Yes, if only with our crocodile tears, if only. Such insincere remorse may remind you of how you enjoyed the late Donald Justice's version of Baudelaire's evasive elegy made for the clumsy servant, wondering only whether the French version should be preferred for its insincerity over the translator's nostalgia for those emotions he never suffered. It may seem strange that an inability to speak of irony without irony argues more clearly for its value than any argument it's not part of, or that nostalgia is the more keenly felt out of proportion to the experience causing it, as a magnifying lens will make any poor macro. But you were always taken with artifice, drawn to it like a sow to a truffle bed, weren't you? Finding it a refuge from the unbearably lofty motive, as from the unendurable punditry of those whom mere self-interest animates. You saw it deftly undermining acres of wind-powered bloviators, and noticed how, when we get too serious in its defense, it vanishes utterly. Ironists surely would consider such an odd custom as, well, ironic. Better to leave its fragile and fugitive self to recover, with our negligence offering all it really needs for any eventual restoration, which someone, someday, on one reality, many perspectives, will lightly illustrate merely by letting you know that the beautiful necktie you're wearing isn't. Okay. I'm going to skip to the other borough briefly and read a poem called Brooklyn in the 70s. Some of you may live in Brooklyn now. I congratulate you on your wealthy parents. The movie deal that just went through for you. Back in the 1970s, Brooklyn was a very different sort of place. So here's Brooklyn in the 70s. In all the years that I lived there, I doubt I once imagined there would come a time when I would learn that I had been priced out of Brooklyn's 19th century sublime. Back then, it seemed much likelier to me that I would see my small investment go belly up, taken by the undertow of our increasing urban enemy, until the shrinking figures shrank to naught, a zero for the brownstone I had bought. Yet I persisted. Property comes with the fictions by which it's inhabited. I lived in not a brownstone, but a myth about a brownstone, as I often said. Brooklyn was where I'd wanted to debut the cozy, safe, but always edgy home I didn't quite succeed in coming from, although the Brooklynites I later knew shared memories that helped me to restore a childhood that I hadn't had before. For Brooklyn is, or was then, all about the joys of restoration and repair. A brownstone, once the fortified redoubt of feuding gangsters or the unkempt lair of junkies, went from shooting gallery to showcase in, let's say, 8 years or 10 of tearing down and building up again, with never any kind of guarantee that spouse or partner would be standing by there at the end, if just to say goodbye. The other outcome happened quite a lot in those days. Many couples would discover that one was satisfied, the other not. The one who wasn't would take on a lover or take off suddenly for parts unknown, leaving the one who was self-satisfied and putting one's now outgrown self aside. For self-discovery meant moving on to find what would suffice and might fulfill. One couldn't find oneself by keeping still. I knew two sisters who had left their order, and when I asked what made them both decide to venture out into a world much weirder, it was the stillness mainly, one replied. People began to ask us what we thought of clergy getting married and the pill. We hadn't thought much of such things until they started asking us. Soon we were out and living here in Brooklyn, where you find us, the other said, where other vows now bind us. Yes, selves were in a frenzy of commotion, and those beyond their expiration dates were being tossed despite years of devotion. So whether by one's doing or by fate's, one found oneself in an unlikely place. And back then, Brooklyn more than filled the bill for sheer unlikeliness. In Clinton Hill or Bedford-Stuyvesant, and with a face one hadn't chosen, one was soon immersed in a role which one hadn't yet rehearsed. The role may have been unimportant. All that mattered was it couldn't be defended by older people, was what one might call unscripted, improvised, and always ended at a goal which, once reached, would no more seem to be the end one had so long intended. The coach stopped, the door opened, he descended. Beyond such twaddle lay another theme, rich with the still unriddled mysteries of life in Brooklyn in the 70s. Here's a short one for those of you who are employed in English departments defending literature against the opposition. It's called Theory Victorious. You'll know, excuse me, you'll know for certain that it's happened when you see how the famished diner spurns his dinner only to fall with relish on the menu. Then you'll know theory's been declared the winner. I'm going to I'll conclude with two poems on sort of on escaping, getting away. The first one is called From Certain Footprints Found at Laitoli. Laitoli is in Tanzania in East Africa, and one of Mary Leakey's students discovered what turned out to be a track that went about 80 feet long, on which 3 or 4 possibly Australopithecus walked on this track for 2.5 to 3 million years ago. They went for about 80 feet and then the track ended. It was made out of volcanic ash and something interrupted the track. The student who discovered it did so after a long bit of looking at what was there in front of him. Let's see, what else? The track was preserved. It's been copied in I think, some kind of plastic by Getty, the Getty Museum, and it has been distributed around the world, actually. There's a museum in Tanzania that has a copy of the original track, which has been buried to preserve it now. So this is about the Australopithecus that wandered off. It's also a kind of crown of sonnets. It's a series of seven sonnets. The last line in each sonnet becomes the first line of the next sonnet, and the first line of the first poem becomes the last line of the last poem. As Humbert said, you can always count on a murderer for a fancy prose style. From Certain Footprints Found at Laitoli. We may imagine they still stroll along, singing perhaps their wordless little song, the female smaller maybe than the male, and yet another with them on the trail that leads them either to or back from water. The child, who may be this pair's son or daughter, as though to measure up to herself grown, steps into footprints that are not her own. Their tracks, laid down 3 million years ago, abruptly end in 80 feet or so, the record of their outing being kept by the volcanic ash in which they stepped. Heel before toe as they went on their way, doing what they might do on any day. And if the course they chose wanted correction, their path extends in only one direction. Their path extends in only one direction, and etched into its interrupted section are indications by which we discover sizes and shapes, lengths of stride, whatever aspect successive footprints may reveal. A depression in the far side of a heel shows that the female carries extra weight on one hip, altering her normal gait. What but an infant can be made of this? And then abruptly, something seems amiss. She halts, pauses, and turns left. Does she sense a difference that makes a difference? Her momentary doubt is one we share, though without knowing what has stopped her there, till she continues. We watch while they recede before us now as signs we've learned to read. Before us now as signs we've learned to read into and out of. It is they who lead and we who follow, haltingly to trace the lineaments of their unhurried pace, our feet stumbling as theirs impress the warm ash with recovered carelessness. Heel before toe until the trail is discontinued, nada, nil. Since they were there once almost in sight, if not quite ever there, no, ever not quite, we may imagine that these four continue at the same pace onto another venue. And at that moment, they all disappear. And what is left of them, found only here, on the path they ventured out upon and quit as soon as their footsteps had created it. As soon as their footsteps had created it, rain and another ashfall on the site turned into muck that turned into cement and made their casual passage permanent in printed code that no one had an eye for or mind until much later to decipher. So could the path be said then to exist? Not till a young paleontologist, out of a welter of competing spores, hyenas, wildcats, rhinos, and wild boars, saw in apparent isolation what could only be the print of someone's foot, and then a set of footprints that extended for 80 feet till suddenly it ended, and with it closed off what had been revealed at the beginning of another field. At the beginning of another field, behind him the female burdened with a child, and at his feet the one who sometimes tries his footprints on for size, impatient to get on with it, instead of waiting while he probes what lies ahead for any sign of a better than even chance, the odd turn that will favor their advance, some reassurance I cannot imagine. Whether or not a countersign is given, they must soon realize that if they linger here, they will put their issue into danger. From now on, unrecorded in the dust, the four of them will go forth as they must, and then, if not before, will slip out from whatever I can say for sure about them. Whatever I can say for sure about them, we, like as not, would not be here without them. Without their having set out on their way at a certain hour of a certain day, some 3.5 million years ago, on a quest whose purpose we can never know, that brought them here, where without meaning to, they left some traces of their passing through. These traces I have come upon and made much of, and if my much making has strayed from whatever in the future comes to be thought to have happened, no apology. For errors inescapably are us, the certainty that starts life as a guess, the accidents that generate the plot. We wouldn't be quite human were they not. We wouldn't be quite human were they not, however small and far away, one dot in a row of dots that when connected shows a line, a path, a trail of steps that goes from there to here, by which we may infer we are what has become of what they were, as they have been an early state of us, on a path once broken, now continuous. We may imagine them, their walk begun one terrifying morning when the sun was hidden in a cloud of ash and soot, and how they had to walk completely through it, until quite suddenly it all came clear. And as they walked on slowly, with less fear, the smaller one took up their wordless song. We may imagine they still stroll along. Thank you. I'm going to finish with a shorter poem called Getting Carded. I used to take my children to a little museum in Vermont in which you could see all of the things that Vermonters who left Vermont came back with, from samurai swords to polar bears and things. And on one of my first visits, there was this giant polar bear in a glass case, and the card on the bottom said, shot by Captain so-and-so, U.S. Navy, 1948. And I came back a few years later, and there was another card that said, endangered species. So that's the card that this is referring to. Getting carded. We couldn't know what we would lose when the endangered species sign began to turn up in our zoos. A small white card propped up on a shelf in front of the cage or pen of one selected for this honor, translated from its habitat into a compact modern flat. By what endangered or by whom it couldn't know until too late. One day it woke up in this room where it patrols compulsively the borders of its shrunken state and stares at what it cannot see. Far dominions, other powers. Its glance keeps on avoiding ours. You wonder why it didn't learn, although, quite frankly, it seems not even to share your mild concern. Time to move on. The fourth grade class behind us wants to claim our spot and press its faces to the glass. We leave endangered and its text and wonder who'll get carded next.